Welcome to the Manifest Your Greatness podcast. Practical and actionable steps that you can take to help manifest the greatness that you already possess deep inside. Hi, and thanks again for joining this episode of the Manifest Your Greatness podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different. I have a special guest, and we're going to be speaking about some topics. And I want to start and preface this episode by saying that the topics we are going to cover are universal. We're going to be talking about them in the context of the island of Hawaii. We're going to be talking about things like cost of living. We're going to be talking about renewable energy. We're going to be talking about economic problems and social challenges that we're facing here on the island of Hawaii. But my challenge for you in this episode is to think about how you can become more involved in these challenges wherever you may be. If you're in another state, if you're in another country, because I believe these challenges that we're going to talk about today are universal. So I invite you to join and listen in on this discussion, and I hope you find it informative, and I hope that you find some of the topics that we cover eye-opening and perhaps insightful and also empowering, because one of the things that we cover that's also very important in today's episode is how we can get involved and how we can make a difference in our local communities. And without further ado, Dr. Kimo Alameda. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this episode of the Manifest Your Greatness podcast, where we explore practical and actionable steps that you can take to help manifest the greatness that you already possess deep inside. And today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Kimo Alameda, who was born and raised right here on the big island of Hawaii in Hilo. He's an accomplished high school and collegiate athlete in multiple sports. He attended Hawaii Loa College, now Hawaii Pacific University. After earning his master's degree, he held several positions in the Department of Education. Then, after obtaining his doctorate, he led the Hawaii Department of Health Children's Division as a statewide transition specialist. He then led the Adult Mental Health Division's Office of Multicultural Services. And 5 years later, he was asked to lead the department's Office of Health Equity. And as his children were growing, Kimo was looking to spend more time at home, and a position with the Hawaii County Office of Aging opened up, which he applied for, was interviewed by a panel, and was selected. And as the executive of the county's Office of Aging, he worked closely with county departments like housing, transportation, parks and recreation, fire, police, civil defense, finance, IT, and research and development. And then came the opportunity to fulfill the role of CEO of the Bay Clinic Health Center, where Dr. Kimo ultimately fulfilled his vision of creating an entity that would serve and improve healthcare island-wide, the Hawai'i Island Community Health Center. While at the Bay Clinic Health Center and Hawai'i Island Community Health Center, Kimo also led the Hawaii Island Fentanyl Task Force, which consists of over 50 professionals from multiple agencies to reduce the number of deaths due to fentanyl overdoses and increase treatment options for individuals with addictions. And recently, Kimo has stepped down from his position as Hawai'i Island County Health Center Vice President of Business Development in order to pursue a run for the Hawaii County Mayor's office. So, Dr. Kimo Alameda, welcome to the Manifest Your Greatness podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
You're welcome, and greetings, everyone.
Yeah, and I'm having the opportunity to interview you today, but if I heard correctly, you also host a TV show yourself on Naleo TV entitled Health is Everywhere. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So I've concluded that series, and so because I'm pursuing my run for mayor full time now. But yeah, it was about maybe a good year and a half. I had a TV show focusing on health. My definition of health is pretty much health is everywhere. But prior to that, I also hosted another show about 5 years ago, and that ran for about 2 years. And that was called Rise Above Hawaii with Dr. Kimo. And that was just, again, interviewing, just like you, interviewing different community folks and stakeholders and such. So
That's great. And you were born and raised right here on the Big Island in Hilo, and before you went to high school, to St. Joseph's High School, yeah, you were in a terrible bicycle accident that ended up significantly altering the path of where you were on up to that point. And I was wondering, could you share a little bit about that experience and how that's
yeah,
changed?
for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I cracked my skull right open, and so and that's why there's like kind of like a scar. I have a pretty bad scar on my forehead, and there's a plate in my head. So yeah, that prevented me from basically boxing. My parents are a boxing family. My dad was a coach. My mom helped, and so my brothers were all boxers. My cousins, I kind of grew up in that environment. And then I got this terrible car accident. I got hit by a car while I was on my bike in Hawaiian Beaches. And then the doctor said I couldn't engage in any contact sports. So then I just started just doing high school sports, which is more like basketball, baseball. Although basketball got pretty physical. So, um, I did some soccer. I did track, volleyball, just played everything I could. And so, and that's kind of turned me into a more of an athlete at the time. But then, over the course of athletics, this is why I'm a big sports fan, is because, you could use that as leverage with kids. My parents started seeing that I loved it, and they started using that as leverage. So, can I play if you don't get good grades and that kind of thing. So then I think that led me to an academic path.
And what specifically led you down this particular field? Was there something that inspired you to get involved in the medical and in the healthcare side of things?
Well, I just, I looked at, well, first, I was raised in a Hawaiian Portuguese family, local values. And I seen my Hawaiian side mostly struggle with stereotypes, prejudices. And I also witnessed alcoholism, in my family. So I kind of grew up watching what that looks like. And my brother, my older brother, he passed recently, but he was proud actually to be of the AA, group, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he'd take me as a kid, and I would go with him, and I was the guy that making coffee and kind of, well, how can I help you, uncle? How can I help you, uncle? And I was just like in, elementary school. And then I began to witness the power of a group of individuals of mixed ethnicities and geographic areas and social incomes and all like that, just bonding on one common goal, and that is to be the best of themselves. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow, that's really cool. So that was my first experience with what counseling can do. And then, of course, I was in the counseling office a lot in high school, and my my counselor said you should be a counselor. So I always had that in the back of my mind. So then when I went to play college basketball at Hawaii Loa, I thought maybe I go into the field of psychology, and then that led to counseling. And here I am now, a psychologist.
Wow, that's quite the journey there.
Yeah.
So Bay Clinic Health Center and West Hawaii Health Clinic, and I know that you were involved in it very significantly in the merger of those two clinics, and I was wondering maybe if you could share a little bit about what led to the exploration of that merger between those two service providers, and what were the benefits that you were hoping to accomplish and offer to local residents by completing that merger?
Yeah. So I worked for the state for about 15 years, mostly in like child and adolescent mental health division, adult mental health division. And I was like the executive for the Office of Health Disparities. So my job was to look at all the stats statewide and to see if there's any health disparities. And there were many, mostly, um, you know, mostly Native Hawaiians dying faster than everybody else, and then poor people and people who live in rural areas, not as healthy. So I was like, so so that turned me on kind of like into health. So I went from psychologist, mental health, to like physical health.
Mhm.
And then I started being kind of aware of these health centers. So I started doing presentations at the health centers around social determinants of health. And my belief was that there are some social and economic determinants that impact how healthy we are. And it's not just a matter of personal choices, because the choices that we make, the health choices that we make, really depend on the health choices that we have. And so, if you live next to a factory that's pumping out, pollutants, then That's not good for you. If you live next to a highway and you cannot sleep at night because of the ambulances and the noise, and then that's not good for you either. So our environment can hinder or help our health.
Mhm.
So then when the position opened for the Bay Clinic Health Center, I was like, man, that is something that I really want to pursue. So I jumped on it, and at that time the Bay Clinic was like we were losing about 150,000 every month, fiscally. So I put on my business hat and I trimmed all of our expenses, and I made some business moves in the clinics, merged some departments, and just to break even. And then I brought in pharmacy. Um, we expanded our pharmacy, and then that helped us get back on track fiscally. And then COVID hit, and that was another kind of a strike. But then I started looking at that point for possibilities to secure the health center, and so we started partnering with West Hawaii Community Health Center, some other health centers, and then I started realizing, I said, we'd be really, really smart if we could merge with another health entity that has the same mission and values like we do. And West Hawaii Community Health Center is a federally qualified health center just like us. So, I thought of the idea, I presented it to the board, and of course, the first question was, who's going to be the CEO? So I had a meeting with the CEO, Richard Taft, there, and I already knew that, if that's going to be a barrier, I don't need to be the CEO. I just want the services.
Yeah.
And so, sure enough, he was a CEO for 17 years. I was a CEO at the time for just 4 years. So I thought, on paper, at least, he had all that experience. So I deferred to Richard. I became VP of New Business Development. And I think that was the best thing that we could have done. We went from being the largest health center on the island to being one of the largest health center in the state now. We
Wow.
serve about 40 to 50,000 patients on this island, which is basically one in every 4 people
Yeah.
are being served by the Hawai'i Island Community Health Center, which is went from 10 clinics to 18 clinics island-wide.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I know one of the things that you continue to focus on, and I've seen this firsthand, is the work that you're doing regarding fentanyl awareness and protection. And just hearing the stats around this drug, I believe the last I heard it was around one person on the island of Hawaii is dying every 10 days. Does that
Yeah.
sound accurate?
Well, yeah, when I first started, it was one person every 13 days, then it became one
Yeah.
person every 11 days, and now the
Yeah.
latest stat is one person every 8 days
Oh my
are,
goodness.
are, are dying from an overdose, mostly associated with fentanyl.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, people die from overdoses, but now they're mostly dying from fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah. Well, and
Pretty
I
sad.
know that you actually came and spoke at, I have 2 daughters. I have a daughter that goes to Waikoloa Middle, and you were there last year in February. I have an older daughter that goes to Kealakekea High School. You were there last year in March. So
Yeah,
I know you're getting around to these schools, you're getting out into the community, and of course, you've got these other professionals that are assisting you in this mission. And this is something that, of course, scares everybody. It really scares me as a parent. This particular drug, I know, and you've pointed this out, it can come in all kinds of disguises in terms of, candies and just things that look harmless. And it is very frightening, just to know that these types of things are getting in front of our kids. And I was just curious, in terms of schools, I was wondering what types of initiatives are currently happening that you've seen that are gaining traction in schools, and perhaps what other initiatives do you think might be helpful for schools in order to continue to raise awareness and increase the protection for our students out there?
yeah. Well, the police and the schools would work together in the past via the DARE program.
Yeah.
Um, and so drugs, alcohol, and mostly on drugs and alcohol. And then, each teacher kind of has the freedom of choice on how deep they want to go into talking about
Mhm.
drug prevention. Some teachers phrase it around the concept of health, healthy choices, but nobody has done it on a large scale like I have island wide, talking directly about drug addiction and how addiction works. Because it's fentanyl now, but 10 years ago it was meth.
Right.
10 years before that, it was coke, crack, cocaine. And before that, it was, alcohol and tobacco. And so our brain is an addictive brain. So, if we don't be careful and if we're not aware, then anybody can become addicted. Because what makes the brain addicted is the substances, like in alcohol, for example. There's a chemical in alcohol that our brain mimics. Same thing with meth and cocaine and tobacco. There are chemicals in there that our brain already produces. So addiction happens when our brain says, well, if you're going to get it from the outside, then I'm not going to produce it anymore, because the brain's not a stupid brain. It's a smart brain. So it doesn't want to overwork itself. But what happens is then if the brain stops producing it, and usually it's those feel good chemicals, right? The dopamine part of our brain.
Yeah.
So then what happens is then we got to go get it. And that's called craving, because we all crave to be happy. We don't want to be depressed. So when that part of the brain shuts down, we basically become depressed because it's not producing that feel good chemical anymore. So that's where craving happens, and that's where addiction happens. So addiction is tricky because it goes from I like it, whatever it is, drinking the Truly or Heineken, can be smoking the joint. You go from I like it to I want it, and scientists we don't know yet when it goes to I need it.
Right.
So so people experiment with drugs. I mean, in cough medicine, there's alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
But once you got to be careful. I tell kids, because and especially the high school kids, adults even. It's like if you're stuck in I want it, that's dangerous, because you can it's like the next stage is I need it, and when you're in I need it, now you're addicted.
Yeah.
And yeah. And so what happened is, so I don't just teach fentanyl, I teach addiction, because the 8 people that's dying every 10 days, they're already addicted to something.
Yeah.
I mean, the one person that's dying every 8 days, they're already addicted to something. So that whatever they're addicted to, that's where fentanyl is coming in. So if they're addicted to cocaine, the fentanyl's in cocaine. If they're addicted to marijuana, fentanyl's in marijuana. If they're addicted to heroin, fentanyl's in heroin.
Wow.
So the only thing we haven't found fentanyl in yet is alcohol and a vaping pen. I mean, we haven't seen it on this island, but I heard that fentanyl is being snuck into the vaping devices. And if that goes worldwide, now we're really in trouble. Our kids are in trouble because a lot of kids vape.
Yeah, it's so scary, and it does sound like it's an ongoing battle and an ongoing process of education, and it's not one of those things that gets solved and then it's over, because like you said, there's always something else, and there's it was meth, and it was before that crack cocaine, and who knows what the next thing will be, but we always have to continue to be vigilant and to be educating people and making sure that they're aware that there are other choices, and making sure they understand their own body and why it's doing what it's doing to help protect themselves that way as well. So yeah, that's so important. And one of the other things that I know you hold really near and dear to your heart is the island housing situation. The island housing crisis is probably a better way to explain it. And here locally, of course, here on the Big Island, with the thousands of families leaving each year, being priced out of paradise, and this whole situation. I went to, not sure if you're aware of this, but I actually went to high school. I went to Radford. I went to high school on Oahu, and I went to UH Manoa. And when I graduated, my feeling was I was getting this degree, but I had no family left. I got there, my father was in the military, but he left while I was still in university. So I had no family left in the islands when I graduated. So my brilliant thought was, okay, I'll go leave for a while, make some money, and then come back. Took me 30 years to come back. so it's hard, it's hard to come back. And I know a lot of people would never leave if they didn't have a choice. And I know one of the things, I know there's a lot of reasons why people leave. Some people leave because they want, but a lot of people leave because of the costs. And one of the things, I think this would be very educational for people who don't live in Hawaii as well, is the ohana units. That for people who aren't aware, these are units that you can build on your own property, that you can keep generations on your property. And of course, with housing being so expensive, it's something that it seems like a very logical option to have available, but it's shunned upon by some camps, right? So it's not an automatic. And I was wondering if maybe you could explain a little bit about what you think are some potential tools that we have available to address this as a community to kind of stem that outflow with what's currently available, and maybe some
Mhm.
things we could do to change that going forward.
Sure. Yeah. So when you look at the housing market, it is fairly expensive. The whole affordable housing formula is misleading and confusing. Like when they start talking about you got to be 200% below the poverty line, that you just lose half of your audience.
Yeah,
So to me, just go back to regular numbers.
right.
$200,000 is affordable.
Yeah,
300,000 is affordable for some families.
yeah,
500,000 is affordable for less families.
yeah,
700, 800,000, which is the going rate probably for an average home, a decent home, is not affordable anymore for most of us.
yeah,
So how do you get a house that's, let's say, 300,000? And I'm talking you're gonna have to get a loan because nobody has $300,000 in cash.
right.
If they do, I have questions. No, so yeah, so you got to get a loan, right? Okay, so how I just use my daughter. She's a school teacher. She has to show at least a 1 year kind of employment, show W-2s. The bank trusts that she's got good credit. Now she can get a loan maybe for 200,000. Can she build a house with 200,000? No.
Mm,
But if she already owns land or if she already has land, now she can build a house. Okay, because the price for materials will not decrease and the price for labor will not decrease.
right,
So the only flexible thing we got in this formula is land.
right.
So if people already own land, then my position is that they should build any house for their family members that they can afford. And the county calls it ADUs. That stands for Accessory Dwelling Unit. On Kauai, they're experimenting with something that's called a temporary dwelling unit that has less restrictions. So I know there are counties out there that are already trying to limit the restrictions. So there's a lot of restrictions with this Ohana housing, which is kind of an accessory dwelling unit. Supposedly the intent is for the Ohana, for the child or for the kupuna,
Mm,
you know, so that they can all kind of live around each other. Because the policies we have now actually fragment families. They
right.
actually cause families to move away, which doesn't make sense. So it hurts families. It doesn't help families. So if I get elected, I want to make sure that these policies bring families together, not separate families. And one way to bring families together is the Ohana program.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think just culturally as well, as if there isn't enough forces that are trying to pull families apart as it is. So many people are forced to relocate because of jobs, and they're forced to relocate because of natural disasters or whatever it may be. But when there's an opportunity to hold the family together with something like this, with an Ohana unit like this, it just seems like it would be something embraced as adding stability to the community and adding that sense of comfort and safety, and also economically for the families, giving them a chance to grow together, instead of having to kind of split resources across cities, states, potentially countries, and then trying to make ends meet that way.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely hear you. Um, so another area I was just curious if we could maybe talk a little about is renewable energy. Of course, electricity and gas prices are high, and we know that there's some significant renewable energy projects going on. I live in Waikoloa, and there's of course, this huge solar farm here, and I think in local families, including ourselves, we see these things and we think, oh, hopefully lower energy costs are around the corner, but as you know, we haven't seen that yet. And I didn't know if there's a longer term link perhaps between these increasing renewable energy projects on the island and a reduction in perhaps future energy costs. Or if not, I was just wondering if perhaps you might be able to share a little bit about what those benefits might look like for residents here.
Yeah. Yeah. The intent for renewable energy is because the idea that we might run out of oil.
Yeah.
Right. So then we got to renew our energy sources.
Yes.
And that's debatable whether or not we're going to run out of oil. But what we do know, oil is expensive. So okay, so that's a good argument. If we could get cheaper electricity through other means, then that makes sense too for the family. So then people are like, okay, why don't we just use the natural energy sources like the sun? Okay, so then we have all these solar farms now, right? So that big solar farm in Waikoloa, supposedly that takes care of 7% to 12% of the island's population. But what does that mean? Does that mean that the prices go down? not necessarily. All that means, or I think it means, is that's just not, we're not using oil. Instead, we're using the sunlight and the energy coming from that. But the price is still the same. So you hit the nail right on the head. There's also good sense that we use renewable energy because of the carbon emissions and protecting the environment and all. I get that. But also, it would be nice to see a reduction in energy costs at
Yeah.
some point, right? If all of this renewable energy projects doesn't help us reduce our costs, then that doesn't help us to stay here,
Yeah.
on the island. So at the end game has to be keeping our local families on the island. Because right now we're the most environmentally friendly state in the United States. So our world has a climate issue, but Hawaii, I mean, we still can breathe fresh air. Our land is not as polluted as other states. We're keeping an eye on that. We're trying to make sure we're environmentally friendly, and we continue to be that way, which is awesome. But people are not leaving Hawaii because the tide is too high or because it's too hot
Mhm.
or because they cannot breathe.
Yeah.
They're leaving Hawaii because their jobs cannot sustain their way of life,
Yeah.
because their way of life is too expensive.
Yeah.
So my platform, in addition to proposing environmental sustainability, we also got to propose economic sustainability.
Yeah.
So it has to go hand in hand. It cannot be just one side. So to me, economic and environmental sustainability is the same coin, different side.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And I know we both share a passion for empowering people and helping them bring out the best in themselves and of course empowering local businesses and helping them become more competitive and ultimately being able to provide more wealth and even more quality jobs for
Mm.
local families is also something that you deeply value. And I was wondering, yeah, just while we're on that topic, what types of initiatives would you like to see develop further or get implemented in order to support that aim of empowering local businesses more?
Sure. I mean, if we can tie in these alternative energy projects with local businesses, then I think that's a win-win. So if we
Yeah.
can reduce the electricity costs and energy costs for our farmers through alternative energies, now that's a win-win because we create employment for the alternative energy industry, and then we reduce the costs for our local businesses.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see how we can generate electricity through turbines and rivers and water and maybe solar. But with solar panels, you got to have an end game. Yeah. So my concern is that, you know is there a decommissioning plan? In
Yeah.
50 years, where do all those panels go? Then that becomes an environmental hazard.
Right.
And then windmills is also, that's another issue too. I mean, it produces a lot of energy, but is there an end game? So you always got to have an end game. People got to think long term, just like with the observatories, right? You got 13 of them, and nobody came up with a decommissioning plan. So
Right.
what do you do with all of that? So we got to also look at, when we have these projects, these renewable energy projects, right? They wanted to burn eucalyptus trees too there. So what's the end game? If you have a good end game and a decommission plan, and you don't create uh, more toxics to our environment, then I think that's a win-win. But in order to support small businesses, we got to help decrease the costs. Because bottom line, if they don't make profit, they're not going to survive. And so
Yeah.
we get too many small businesses closing their doors. So like I was at downtown Hilo, and I was asking about the insurance costs, because it's a tidal wave area, right?
Mhm.
It's through the roof. So maybe the county got to work with the feds to subsidize those costs so we can decrease those costs. And then property tax. To me, if you're running a business, the county should limit those taxes on the businesses. But we should tax like crazy those undeveloped properties.
Yeah.
Those undeveloped businesses. Like in Hilo Town, there's so many abandoned buildings. I mean, everywhere on the island. So
Yeah.
if it's abandoned, I want to go to the landowner, and if it's abandoned more than 1 year,
Mhm.
I want to explore the idea of raising their taxes so you can incentivize them to either sell it or
Yeah.
develop it, but don't
Right.
leave it abandoned, because abandoned buildings attract homeless
Yeah.
individuals, and it doesn't look good for the community. So
Yeah.
I have all kind of ideas around small businesses.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's so true. And then, you talked about, of course, local businesses. One of them is the farmers, right? The farmers,
Mhm.
and you talked about helping them reduce their cost, hopefully in some ways. And I love to buy from the local farmers markets and love to buy local foods. I live close to Waimea. Of course, there's lots of options in terms of local grown produce. But at the same time, it's kind of hard sometimes. You go to Costco or somewhere like that, and you see tomatoes that have, shipped thousands of miles that are cheaper than the Camuela tomatoes, and it's like, why is that? And so it's trying to, of course, support and buy local, but sometimes, we also got to think about our checkbooks too, and local avocados. There's so many wonderful local grown products, and I realize that the costs are so high, and that's of course affecting the pricing, but. You mentioned some other potential incentives or potentially government support or things like that. Would that be perhaps some options or some things to explore for helping the local farmers stay competitive as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, our local farmers, man, they struggle because if you talk to our local farmers, they'll tell you that the policies work against them. Like it's easier to be a farmer outside of the United States because there's less bureaucracy than in the United States.
Yeah.
So our farmers are working really hard with our federal delegation. For us, it's Jill Tukuda, and trying to limit those restrictions that end up costing our farmers more. And
Yeah.
it's issues around the cost of importing it, cost of exporting it, of course, energy costs, property tax. If we cannot do it as a county, then we should partner with the state and the feds through some kind of subsidy program to decrease the cost. But we cannot just not do anything, is my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely true. Um, Yeah, well, I wanted to close out with some a little bit more lighthearted topics. I know we covered a lot of very serious. Well, this is serious, but it's not life or death, and it's not drug related, and we'll survive without it. But and I might be a little biased on this particular topic, but as I mentioned, we live in Waikoloa. I know one of the things that you mentioned is very important to you, or one of the things on your agenda is you'd like to increase the number of covered play courts. And living in Waikoloa, my youngest daughter, she's joined this basketball club in Waimea, and they have a beautiful facility out there. Talk about a court. It's like while they're playing basketball on one court, there's another court, people playing basketball, there's volleyball, there, and this is all happening in one building. And currently, of course, in Waikoloa, which is as I'm sure is a fast growing community, and about 7,500 people, I think, based on the last census. And I was just curious, that's something that, a lot of the community members want, of course, is to have a covered play court, but it doesn't look like we're making much headway in that space there. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on maybe what we could do or what could be done to kind of raise
Yeah.
that on the priority list.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many priorities, right? So we got, like safety has to be priority number one.
Absolutely.
So like every household, you got revenues coming in, and you got to figure out how to budget it, right? So for a household, you got to keep the lights on, electric got to work, and you got to flush your toilet, and then you got to feel safe. And then if there's extra funds, well, maybe you can go to the movies, and maybe you can go play basketball. But at some point, play got to be as important as work and living. So that's why my platform is live, work, and play, kind of equal. Especially our youth. See, because our youth, it's through play that they learn who they are. It's through play that they learn their strengths, their weaknesses, and they start to shape their identity. And then they also, increase their social interactions, and they build their networks. Only through play that happens. So we gotta put recreation as equally important. But again, we live in a capitalistic society, so money dictates services and programs. But I wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't for play, for me. If it wasn't for basketball, if it wasn't for the connection with the coach, it wasn't for, that building my self-esteem, I would not be talking to you. So I cannot wait to sit down, look at the budget, and look at these areas that does not have play courts. So play courts is perfect because, you don't have to spend the big dollars to build a gym, because an open play court, like what you mentioned, with Waimea, and then in Hilo it's Panieva, that can offer three different groups, the opportunity to play. And so we would like to see that not just in Waikoloa. I like to see that in Waikoloa, but I also like to see it in South Kona,
Yeah.
because they have Higashihara Park, which is an open park. It's hot, it rains. I think they need a covered play court too. Hilo, we got Panieva. Waimea got Waimea. Pahoa got Pahoa. But we got to make our way to your side Waikoloa needs a play court. Kohala could benefit. Doesn't have to be 3 courts because they all play basketball. but I think they should have a play court. We move on down. South Kona should have a play court. Middle Lee has one. It should be covered. Ocean View, they got a nice court. Again, but we should look at covering it. Of course, we need the staff to maintain it too. And then, if you wrap around to Ka'u, they need baseball lights. They have a gym there, so they need more of a recreational outside. So I'm looking at all of that because I think that's important for our communities.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those things when our youth especially has those options to go and to play in a safe environment, and that of course pulls in organization. You get opportunities for coaching, you get opportunities for mentorship, you get opportunities to learn how to cooperate and team play and sportsmanship and things like that. And those are all great skills, right? And they all play into your development and into the workforce ultimately, and hopefully into the lives that you end up leaving as well. So couldn't agree more. So I know you're a busy man, and I just want to say again, thank you very much for taking the time today. And it sounds like you've got so many wonderful initiatives that you're already working towards. And I know that even though you're running for mayor now, you've been doing so many things locally in the community. And obviously, like I was saying before, my kids know it. I had the opportunity to meet you. I know that you're out there, so I know it. And then I think having this conversation today and having the opportunity to share it with even more people, now hopefully other people will know that as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to join today. And I sincerely look forward to hopefully having future conversations with you on how we can do things to help support the community even further going forward.
Well, thank you. You've been a great host, and you asked really good questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Manifest Your Greatness podcast. If you liked what we've explored on this episode, then you'll love the Manifest Your Greatness coaching program. The Manifest Your Greatness coaching program is uniquely tailored to help support you on your journey to become the absolute best version of yourself. So if you are committed to taking the steps required to significantly and permanently level up in any area of your life, visit manifestyourgreatness.com/contact. Again, that's manifestyourgreatness.com/contact and schedule your free consultation call today. Talk soon.